At my son's engagement party, I handed him a small wooden box I'd kept for 25 years. His fiancée's mother looked at it and laughed. A nurse giving investment advice? How adorable. My son pushed the box back across the table. "Mom, please, not here." I said nothing. I picked up the box, tucked it under my arm, and walked out of the restaurant. The next morning, I called my attorney. He answered on the first ring. "Margaret? I was wondering when you'd finally make the call." "Hey there. Quick question before we continue. Have you ever had someone dismiss you because of your job title? Drop a comment. I read every single one. And hit subscribe if you want more stories like this. Some details ahead are fictionalized for storytelling, but the lesson is absolutely real. Now, back to what happened after that dinner. The engagement party was held at Carmichael's, one of those downtown Boston restaurants where the bread basket costs $14 and the waiters move like they're performing surgery. Dr. Victoria Shaw had chosen the venue. She chose everything. That was the thing about my son's future mother-in-law. She didn't suggest. She decided. I arrived at 7:15, 15 minutes early because that's how I was raised. I wore a navy blue dress I'd bought at TJ Maxx the week before and a pearl necklace my mother gave me when I graduated nursing school in 1986. My shoes were comfortable because I'd spent 32 years on my feet in hospital corridors and I'd stopped pretending heels were worth the pain sometime around 2005. Daniel was already there. My son, 29 years old, first-year resident at Boston General, the kind of handsome that made old ladies at the grocery store stop and tell me I'd done a good job. He had his father's jawline and my stubbornness, which was both a blessing and a problem. Vanessa Chen sat beside him, tall, perfect posture, the kind of woman who looked like she'd been assembled from a magazine. She was a dermatologist, 2 years out of residency, already pulling in $300,000 a year at her mother's practice. She smiled at me when I walked in, but her eyes did that thing they always did. Scanned my outfit, calculated its value, moved on. Dr. Victoria Shaw sat at the head of the table like it was a throne. She was 61, sharp-featured, silver hair cut in a precise bob. She ran Shaw Dermatology Associates, 3 locations across eastern Massachusetts, and she had a way of making you feel like you were a patient she was about to diagnose with something unpleasant. Beside her sat her husband, Gerald, a retired orthopedic surgeon who mostly stayed quiet and drank scotch. 8 other guests filled the long table. Vanessa's colleagues, Gerald's golf friends, a couple I didn't recognize who apparently owned a vineyard in Napa. I was the only person at the table who earned less than $200,000 a year. I could feel it the way you feel humidity. Nobody said it, but the air was thick with it. Dinner moved the way these things do. Champagne toasts, laughter that was slightly too loud, stories about vacations in places I'd never been. Victoria held court, telling a story about a patient who'd flown in from Dubai for a consultation. Everyone laughed at the right moments. I waited until dessert. Creme brulee for the table, which I didn't touch because I'd never liked custard. I reached into my purse and pulled out the wooden box. It was small, maybe 6 inches long, made of walnut. I'd bought it at a craft fair in Vermont in 1999 when Daniel was 3 years old. The lid had a simple brass clasp, slightly tarnished from years in my bedroom closet. "Daniel," I said, "I wanted to give you something." The table quieted. Not all at once, but enough. Daniel looked at the box, then at Vanessa, then at Victoria. I recognized that glance. It was the same look he'd started giving me in high school when I picked him up from school in my scrubs. The look that said, "Please don't embarrass me." He took the box carefully. "Mom, you didn't have to. Open it." He lifted the clasp. Inside, nestled in faded blue velvet, were stock certificates. 18 of them, each one representing shares I'd purchased between 1999 and 2015. Biotech companies, medical device manufacturers, pharmaceutical firms. Names that meant nothing to most people but everything to anyone who'd watched the healthcare industry for 3 decades. Victoria leaned over. She couldn't help herself. "What is that? Stock certificates?" She let out a small laugh, the kind that was designed to sound charming but landed like a slap. "Margaret, that's very sweet. A nurse giving investment advice." "How adorable," Gerald chuckled. Vanessa pressed her lips together, trying not to smile. Daniel closed the box. "Mom, please, not here." He slid it back across the white tablecloth toward me. "This isn't really. I mean, we're doing fine. Vanessa and I have our financial planner. But thank you." Victoria patted his arm. "She means well, darling. It's the thought that counts." She turned to me with that smile. "Margaret, we all appreciate the gesture." "Really? But Daniel's in good hands now." I looked around the table. 9 people avoiding my eyes, my son holding his fiancée's hand like it was a life raft, Victoria Shaw watching me with the satisfied expression of a woman who believed she'd won something. I picked up the box, placed it back in my purse. I stood up slowly, smoothed my dress, and pushed in my chair. "Thank you for dinner," I said. My voice was steady. 32 years of telling families their loved ones didn't make it had taught me how to keep my voice steady when everything inside was breaking. I walked out of Carmichael's into the October night. The air was sharp. Leaves scraped across the sidewalk. I sat in my 12-year-old Honda Civic for 10 minutes before starting the engine. They thought that was the end of it. The nurse knew her place. The box went back in the purse. Everybody finished their crème brûlée. They had no idea what was in that box. And they had no idea what I was about to do. That night, I sat in my apartment. 2 bedrooms in a building in Quincy, the kind of place where you could hear your neighbor's TV through the walls if they watched it past 10. I'd lived there for 19 years. The rent was $1,400 a month, and I'd never been late once. I set the wooden box on the kitchen table and opened it. 18 stock certificates. I knew their value without checking, but I checked anyway. I pulled out the laptop Daniel had bought me for Christmas 3 years ago and logged into my brokerage account. 10 à $8. 4 millions. It had started in 1999. I was 34, divorced, raising Daniel alone on a night shift nurse's salary at Boston General. $42,000 a year before taxes. I worked 3 12-hour shifts a week, sometimes 4 when they were short-staffed, which was always... I'd been drawing blood from a patient in the cardiac unit when I overheard 2 doctors talking about a small biotech company that had just received FDA approval for a new cardiac stent. The stock was trading at $6 a share. One of the doctors said he'd put in $50,000. The other said he was waiting for it to drop. I went home that morning after my shift, sat at this same kitchen table, and bought 200 shares for $1,200. Money I'd saved by packing my own lunches for a year. The stock hit $94 within 18 months. That was when I understood something the doctors didn't. They read financial reports. I read patients. I saw which devices worked and which ones collected dust. I saw which medications actually helped and which ones the nurses joked about behind the pharmacy counter. I knew which companies were making things that mattered because I used their products every single night, holding them in my gloved hands while someone's life hung in the balance. So I kept buying. Every overtime shift, every holiday I volunteered for because holiday pay was time and a half, every tax refund, every penny that didn't go to rent or Daniel's clothes or groceries. I bought shares in companies whose products I trusted with my patients' lives. By 2005, my portfolio was worth $1, $2 million. By 2010, $4.8 million. I never told anyone, not my sister in Florida, not my best friend Ruthie who worked the same unit, not Daniel. Why? Because I'd watched money destroy my marriage. Daniel's father, Ray, had been a good man until he inherited $60,000 from his uncle in 1993. Within a year, he'd quit his electrician's job, started day trading, lost everything, and blamed me for not believing in him. He left when Daniel was 2. Last I heard, he was living in a studio in Reno, still chasing the next sure thing. I didn't want Daniel to grow up thinking money was the answer. I wanted him to become a doctor because he cared about people, not because he wanted the salary. I wanted him to earn his own way, to understand that a mother who worked night shifts and came home smelling like antiseptic was still worth respecting. But something went wrong. Somewhere between high school and medical school, Daniel stopped seeing my work as sacrifice and started seeing it as status. He stopped telling people his mother was a nurse. He started saying she worked in healthcare. When he met Vanessa, When he entered the world of the Shaws, the distance became a canyon. I opened the safe in my bedroom closet. Combination was Daniel's birthday. Inside, alongside the brokerage statements, sat another stack of documents, property records. I owned 14 properties in the greater Boston area, apartment buildings mostly. Small ones, 4 to 8 units each. Total assessed value, $11.6 million. I'd started buying in 2008 when the housing market collapsed and everyone was terrified. A 2-family in Dorchester for $110,000. Fixed it up using YouTube videos and weekend hours between shifts. Rented it to a single mother and a retired teacher. The rent covered the mortgage. Then I bought another. Then another. I also owned something else. I pulled out a folder labeled Shaw Medical Plaza LLC. The building at 740 Commonwealth Avenue where Dr. Victoria Shaw ran her flagship dermatology practice. 3 stories, 12,000 square feet, prime Back Bay real estate. Victoria had been leasing the space for 9 years. She thought her landlord was a faceless investment company based in Delaware. Her landlord was me. I bought the building in 2017 for $3.8 million through my LLC. Victoria's practice paid me $22,000 a month in rent. She had never once been late, and she had never once asked who owned the building. Why would she? She was too important for details like that. I closed the safe and went back to the kitchen table. The wooden box sat there, rejected, like the passbook in someone else's story. But this wasn't about a passbook. This was about 18 stock certificates that represented 25 years of overnight shifts, of holding dying people's hands at 3 a.m, of watching monitors beep in dark rooms while the rest of the city slept. My son had pushed them back across the table like they were coupons from the Sunday paper. A nurse giving investment advice. How adorable. I picked up my phone and called my attorney, Frank DeLuca. He answered on the first ring, which meant he'd been expecting this. Margaret, I was wondering when you'd finally make the call. I need a few things, Frank. First, I want to review the Shaw Medical Plaza lease. Every clause, every renewal option, every default provision. And second, I need you to recommend a private investigator. Someone who handles domestic matters. Quiet, professional. Frank didn't ask why. We'd worked together for 12 years. He knew I didn't make calls like this without reason. Nina Reeves, he said. Former state police detective. She's thorough and she doesn't talk. I'll text you her number. I hung up and looked at the clock. 11:45. My shift at Boston General started in 6 hours. I should sleep. Instead, I sat there until 2 a.m, surrounded by documents that proved I was worth $30 million, living in a $1,400 apartment, about to go mop up someone's blood for $28 an hour. Not because I had to, because I chose to, because that job meant something. Because every night I walked those hospital floors, I was saving lives. And no amount of money could replace the dignity of that. Nina Reeves delivered her report 8 days later. We met at a diner in Somerville, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been brewed during the previous administration. Nina was 53, short gray hair, no makeup, the steady gaze of someone who'd spent 20 years interviewing liars. She slid a manila folder across the table. Your son's fiancée has problems. I opened the folder. The first page was a financial summary. Vanessa Chen, despite her $300,000 salary, was $214,000 in debt. Credit cards maxed. A personal loan from an online lender at 23% interest. Monthly payments she was barely covering. Where's the money going? Nina turned to the second section. Screenshots from 3 separate online gambling platforms. Transaction records showing deposits of $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 at a time. She's been gambling online for at least 3 years. Sports betting, poker, slots. She wins occasionally, which is the worst thing that can happen to a gambler because it keeps them going. I felt my stomach drop. Not for me. For Daniel. There's more. Nina's voice was careful. She turned to the third section. Photographs. Vanessa, leaving a hotel in Cambridge. Not alone. A man I didn't recognize, tall, dark-haired, well-dressed. 3 different dates, 3 different hotels. Dr. Kevin Park, orthopedic surgeon at Massachusetts General. They've been seeing each other for 7 months. I closed the folder. The diner hummed around us. A truck driver at the counter eating eggs, 2 college kids sharing a stack of pancakes. The waitress refilling coffee with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. Does Victoria know about any of this? The gambling? I don't think so. The affair? Nina paused. Victoria Shaw is a controlling woman, but she's not omniscient. She sees what she wants to see. Her daughter is perfect. End of story. And Daniel? Your son appears to be completely in the dark. He works 80-hour weeks at the hospital. He barely has time to sleep, let alone investigate his fiancée's bank statements. I sat with that for a moment. My son, exhausted and trusting, engaged to a woman who was gambling away her future and sleeping with another man. And the mother-in-law who'd laughed at my gift had no idea her perfect daughter was drowning. What do you want to do with this? Nina asked. The same question I'd been asking myself for 8 days. I could call Daniel right now, show him the folder, watch his face fall apart. But he'd defend Vanessa. He'd say I was jealous, that I was trying to sabotage his happiness because I couldn't accept I was losing him to the Shaw family. He'd choose her over the truth, because that's what love does when it hasn't been tested yet. I need time, I said. Take it. But Margaret, people in Vanessa's position tend to escalate. The debt will grow. The affair will get careless. Eventually something breaks. I know. I've worked in emergency rooms for 32 years. I know exactly how things break. Before we continue, have you ever watched someone you love walk toward a cliff and known they wouldn't listen if you warned them? Drop a comment below. I want to hear your story. And if you're still with me, stay, because what happens next at Victoria Shaw's medical practice changed everything. 3 weeks after Nina's report, I made my move. Not against Vanessa, not yet. Against the foundation her family stood on. I sat in Frank DeLuca's office on a Wednesday afternoon. His desk was covered in the Shaw Medical Plaza lease documents. Frank was 64, bald, and had the comforting demeanor of a man who'd been navigating rich people's problems for 40 years. The lease expires in 90 days, Frank said. Standard commercial terms, no automatic renewal. She has to request renewal 60 days before expiration, and the landlord, which is you, has full discretion to approve, deny, or modify terms. Has she submitted a renewal request? Not yet. She usually waits until the last minute. She's done it twice before. And the building's current market rate? Frank pulled up a comparable analysis. She's paying $22,000 a month. Market rate for that square footage in Back Bay is now $38,000 to $42,000. I leaned back in my chair. Victoria Shaw had been getting a discount for 9 years without knowing it. I could have raised her rent at any point. I never did because it wasn't necessary. Now it was. When she submits the renewal, I want you to respond with new terms. Market rate, $40,000 a month, non-negotiable. Frank wrote it down without blinking. She'll push back. She will. She might threaten legal action. She can try. The lease is clean. We're within our rights. She's going to want to know who owns the building. I smiled. Then I suppose she'll find out. Frank looked at me over his reading glasses. Margaret, I've known you for 12 years. You're not a vengeful person. What's this really about? I thought about the engagement dinner, the wooden box sliding back across the tablecloth, a nurse giving investment advice. How adorable, my son's eyes looking anywhere but at me. It's about making sure my son sees the truth before it's too late. All of it. Frank nodded slowly. 90 days. 90 days. Victoria Shaw submitted her lease renewal request on a Friday, 58 days before expiration. By Monday, Frank had sent back the new terms. I know this because Victoria called Daniel that same evening, and Daniel called me. It was 8:30. I was in the hospital break room eating a turkey sandwich between patients. Mom, something weird is happening with Victoria's practice. Her landlord is raising the rent to $40,000 a month. That's too bad. She's panicking. She says it'll eat into the practice's profits. She might have to close one of the satellite locations. Sounds like a business problem. Mom, can you just... He paused. I heard Vanessa's voice in the background, sharp, impatient. Can you come to dinner this Sunday? Victoria wants the whole family together. She's stressed. I'll be there. Sunday dinner was at the Shaw residence in Wellesley. A colonial revival that Gerald had bought in 2003, 4 bedrooms, 3-car garage, a kitchen island bigger than my entire bathroom. Victoria opened the door wearing silk and anxiety. Margaret, thank you for coming. It was the first time she'd ever thanked me for anything. Dinner was roast chicken and tension. Victoria spent most of the meal talking about the lease situation, her voice rising with each glass of wine. The new landlord is clearly trying to force us out. $40,000 a month for that space. It's extortion. Have you considered relocating? I asked calmly. Relocating? Victoria looked at me like I'd suggested she perform surgery with a butter knife. We've been at that location for 9 years. Our patients know where to find us. Our reputation is tied to that address. You can't just relocate a medical practice like it's a food truck. I understand. Rent increases are difficult. Difficult? Margaret, this could bankrupt us. Gerald poured himself another scotch. Daniel stared at his plate. Vanessa was on her phone under the table, her thumbs moving fast, probably checking gambling odds. I noticed. Nobody else did. Victoria, I said carefully. May I ask you something? What? At the engagement dinner, you said something. A nurse giving investment advice. How adorable. I let the words sit in the air. Did you mean that? Victoria blinked. Margaret, I was joking. I didn't mean to. Because I've been thinking about it. About what nurses know and don't know. About what people assume when they see scrubs and comfortable shoes. The table went quiet. Daniel shifted in his seat. Mom, come on. Let's not do this. I'm not doing anything, Daniel. I'm having a conversation. I turned back to Victoria. Your lease is with Shaw Medical Plaza, LLC. The building is owned by a holding company registered in Massachusetts. Have you ever looked into who owns that company? Victoria frowned. Why would I? My attorney handles the lease. Maybe you should look into it. The silence stretched. Gerald set down his scotch glass. Vanessa looked up from her phone for the first time all evening. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Margaret, what are you saying? I'm saying that sometimes the person signing your lease and the person serving you turkey at this table are the same person. The room went still. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking. That's impossible, Victoria whispered. I bought 740 Commonwealth Avenue in 2017 for $3.8 million, cash, through my LLC. I kept my voice even, the same voice I used when delivering difficult news to families in the ICU, calm, clear, without cruelty. I've been your landlord for 9 years, Victoria. Every month, your practice sends $22,000 to a company I own. Victoria's face cycled through disbelief, confusion, and something close to fear. Gerald set down his fork. Daniel was staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. That's not. You're a nurse, Victoria stammered. I am. I'm also the owner of 14 properties in the greater Boston area, a stock portfolio worth $18 million, and the building where you've built your entire practice. I paused. Being a nurse doesn't make me stupid, Victoria. It makes me observant. Daniel stood up from the table. Mom, how? When? 25 years of night shifts, Daniel. 25 years of investing in companies whose products I use to save lives. 25 years of buying properties when the market crashed because I understood that fear creates opportunity. But you live in a 2-bedroom in Quincy. Because I choose to. Because the apartment reminds me of who I am. Because I didn't want you to grow up thinking money was the point. Daniel's face crumbled. The wooden box. The stock certificates. Worth $18.4 million. I was trying to give you your inheritance. You pushed it back across the table because your fiancée's mother told you a nurse couldn't possibly know anything about investing. Daniel sat down hard. Vanessa had gone pale. Victoria found her voice. If you own the building, then the rent increase is within my rights. Market rate is $40,000. You've been underpaying for 9 years. I folded my napkin carefully. But the rent isn't why I'm here tonight. The table waited. I reached into my purse and pulled out Nina Reeves' folder. Set it on the table between the dinner plates and the half-empty wine glasses. Daniel, I need you to look at this. What is it? The truth about the woman you're about to marry? Vanessa stood up so fast her chair hit the wall behind her. What is that? What did you do? Sit down, Vanessa. My voice was the ICU voice, the one that stopped panicking families in their tracks. She sat. Daniel opened the folder. I watched his face as he read. The bank statements, the gambling transactions, the photographs, 3 hotels, 7 months, Dr. Kevin Park. The silence in the dining room was absolute. Victoria leaned over Daniel's shoulder, reading. I watched the color drain from her face in stages, like water receding from a shoreline. No, Victoria whispered. No, this isn't. $214,000 in gambling debt, I said quietly. 3 online platforms, and a 7-month affair with an orthopedic surgeon at Mass General. Daniel closed the folder. His hands were shaking. He looked at Vanessa. Is this true? Vanessa's mask cracked. Not all at once. First the eyes, then the mouth, then the whole facade. She started crying. Not the pretty kind. The ugly, gasping kind that comes when you've been hiding something so long that the weight of it finally crushes you. I was going to stop. I kept telling myself I'd stop. The gambling or the affair? Daniel's voice was barely audible. Both. I don't know. I was drowning, Daniel. The debt kept growing and I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell anyone. Kevin? He knew about the gambling. He said he understood. Victoria slammed her hand on the table. You have destroyed this family. No, I spoke firmly. She hasn't destroyed anything. She's sick. Gambling addiction is a disease. I've seen it in my patients for 30 years. I looked at Vanessa steadily. But the affair was a choice. And my son deserved better than to find out from a folder. Daniel pushed back from the table. I need to go. Vanessa reached for his arm. Don't! He pulled away, not with anger, with something worse, exhaustion. The look of a man who'd been running on empty for months and had just hit the wall. He walked out the front door. I heard his car start. Victoria was crying now, mascara running. Gerald sat frozen, scotch untouched. Vanessa had her face in her hands. I stood up. I collected the folder. I put it back in my purse. Victoria, I said from the doorway, the rent increase stands, but I'll give you a 6-month transition period to find a new location or adjust your budget. That's more grace than you showed me at that dinner table. She didn't answer. I didn't expect her to. I drove home through empty streets, October wind shaking the last leaves off the trees. At a red light, my phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Mom, I'm parked outside your building. Can I come up? I found him sitting on the steps of my apartment building, still in his dinner clothes, tie loosened. He looked like he was 12 years old again, the way he used to sit on the porch waiting for me to come home from night shift. I sat down beside him. The concrete was cold. How long have you known? He asked. About Vanessa? 8 days before tonight. About the money. All of it. The properties, the stocks. How long? 25 years. He was quiet for a long time. A car passed. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked. I pushed your gift back across the table. You did. I was embarrassed. By you, by the box, by the fact that my mother is a nurse and my fiancé's mother is a doctor. I know. That's the worst thing I've ever done. No. The worst thing you ever did was stop telling people what I do for a living. The box was just the moment I realized how far you drifted. He started crying. My grown son, 29 years old, a doctor himself, crying on the front steps of a Quincy apartment building because he'd spent years being ashamed of the woman who built everything he stood on. I let him cry. Some things need to come out before they can heal. I'd learned that in 32 years of nursing. After a while, he wiped his face. What do I do now? That depends on who you want to be. I don't know who that is anymore. Good. That's the right place to start. Vanessa needs help. Real help. Whether you're the one to give it to her is something only you can decide. But you need to decide it with your eyes open, not with hers closed. He nodded slowly. Mom, the stock certificates, are they really worth $18.4 million? Yes, but that money isn't yours yet. He looked at me. It's in a trust. You can access it when you've done 2 things. 1, you complete your residency. Not because of the money, but because you started something and you finish it. 2. You volunteer one shift a month at the free clinic on Blue Hill Avenue, because you need to remember what medicine looks like when nobody's paying. And if I do those things, then you'll understand why I gave you stock certificates instead of a check. I didn't give you money, Daniel. I gave you 25 years of paying attention. 25 years of watching and learning and knowing which companies were actually making things that saved lives. That's the inheritance, not the dollars, the discipline. He sat there for a long time, processing. Then he did something he hadn't done since he was 15. He leaned his head against my shoulder. I'm sorry, Mom. I know. I'll be at the free clinic next Saturday. I know that too. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of 740 Commonwealth Avenue, the building I'd owned for 9 years. The building where Victoria Shaw had run her dermatology practice until she relocated to a smaller office in Brookline. The renovation was nearly complete. Frank DeLuca stood beside me, clipboard in hand. 12 exam rooms, 4 consultation offices, a pharmacy dispensary, and a waiting room that seats 40, he said. The Blue Hill Community Health Center, Boston's newest nonprofit clinic. I'd converted the building. Victoria's luxury dermatology practice, the one where Botox appointments cost $800, was now a community health center, offering free and sliding-scale primary care to uninsured patients. Teachers, janitors, home health aides, restaurant workers, people like the ones I'd worked beside my entire life. Daniel appeared at my elbow. He was wearing scrubs, not the designer ones Vanessa used to buy him. Regular hospital scrubs, slightly wrinkled, with a coffee stain on the left sleeve. The first patients are scheduled for Monday, he said. We've already got a waiting list. How many? 312. I nodded. 312 people who needed a doctor and couldn't afford one. My building, my son, my money making something that mattered. Victoria called me yesterday, Daniel said quietly. And? She apologized. She said she didn't understand. She said she underestimated you. That's kind of her. She also asked if there's a dermatology referral she could do here, pro bono, 1 day a month. I looked at him. What did you tell her? I told her Mondays work best. I almost smiled. Almost. Vanessa had checked into a treatment program in Connecticut 2 weeks after the dinner. Gambling addiction, intensive outpatient. Daniel had ended the engagement but drove her to the facility himself. He visited once a month, not as a fiancé, as someone who understood that people deserved help even when they'd made terrible choices. I respected him for that. He was starting to become the man I'd always hoped he'd be, not because of my money, because he'd finally seen what money couldn't buy and what it could. That evening, I went back to my apartment in Quincy. Same 2 bedrooms, same $1,400 a month, same view of the parking lot. I could buy a brownstone in Back Bay. I could buy 10 of them. But this apartment was where I'd raised my son, where I'd sat at the kitchen table after every night shift and logged into my brokerage account, where I'd stored 25 years of patience in a closet safe behind winter coats. On the wall above the kitchen table, I'd framed the wooden box. Not the stock certificates, just the box itself. Walnut with its tarnished brass clasp, sitting behind glass like something in a museum. A nurse giving investment advice. How adorable. Those words had started everything. But Victoria hadn't insulted me that night. She'd revealed herself. She'd shown me exactly what my son's future looked like if I didn't act. A life measured by job titles and dinner reservations instead of purpose and character. My phone rang. Daniel. Mom, I'm leaving the hospital. Want me to pick up anything? I'm fine. How was your shift? Long. Lost a patient in the ER, 67-year-old woman, cardiac arrest. Her daughter was in the waiting room. I had to tell her. His voice was heavy. I knew that weight. I'd carried it for 32 years. You sat with the daughter? For an hour. She kept saying her mom was a housekeeper. Like she needed me to know that. Like she was apologizing for taking up my time. What did you tell her? I told her that my mother was a nurse who worked night shifts for 30 years and that there's no such thing as a job that isn't worth respecting. I closed my eyes. The apartment was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, heading toward Boston General, where someone else's mother was starting her shift. Daniel. Yeah, Mom? I'm proud of you. A pause. I heard him breathe. Thanks, Mom. I'll see you Saturday at the clinic. I'll be there. I hung up and looked around my apartment. The framed wooden box on the wall, the safe in the closet, the laptop on the table showing a portfolio I'd built one night shift at a time. $30 million. And the thing I was proudest of couldn't be measured in any currency. My son had learned to sit with a grieving stranger for an hour and tell her that her mother's work mattered. That was the inheritance. Not the stocks, not the properties, not the building on Commonwealth Avenue. The understanding that every job done with care is sacred. I didn't build my wealth to prove Victoria Shaw wrong. I built it because I understood something she never did. The people who empty the bedpans, who mop the floors at midnight, who hold your hand when the monitors flatline, those people are the foundation. Everything else is just architecture. And to you listening to this story, remember this. Don't wait for a crisis to show your family who you are. Don't test the people you love by hiding your truth. I made that mistake. I nearly lost my son because I chose silence over honesty. But also remember this. Your job is not your worth. Your paycheck is not your value. The world will try to rank you by your title, your address, your car. Let them. While they're busy measuring things that don't matter, you'll be building something that does. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear that their work has dignity. Subscribe to Crystal Revenge for more stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary choices. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever been underestimated because of what you do for a living? Thank you for staying with me until the very end. Your time is valuable, and I'm honored you spent it here. And remember, it wasn't adorable. It was 25 years of brilliance disguised as a night shift.